Garret, I sure would appreciate it if you would say a prayer.
Okay. God, we just ask you to be with us, to be with everyone here, and to be on the heart and the conscience of everyone that participates tonight and that views this afterwards. This is one of the biggest topics we have to face today because it touches on so very much. So God, be with us as we share, be with us as we learn. In all your holy names, amen.
Amen. Do you want to check in? How are you doing?
Oh, I'm fighting inflation, fighting depression, and trying to fight my way through this new world. So that's what it is. How about you?
I'm trying to not look at it as fighting for a little while. It occurred to me when I was working on the liturgy for this week that I said something about fighting for justice in one of the prayers. And I remembered, again, one of my favorite contemporary philosophers, Caroline Casey, who points out that when we always talk about fighting and war and using war metaphors and battle, that you add heat instead of, adding light.
Enlightenment.
Yeah. So I'm trying not to, and also because it's kind of a martial arts thing,
Mm-hmm.
If you don't go in with resistance, you can push through. So starting this afternoon, I said, okay, I'm not going to think of it as fighting my way through this today. I'm not going to think of, fighting inflation and fighting the craziness. I'm just going to try and think of it as, I haven't quite gotten to dancing with it, but maybe just facing it, playing with it, not fighting, because it's giving me a headache.
Yeah, like maybe walking with it, just accepting that it's there.
Yeah, because all this stuff is happening, it's going to keep happening, and it might still get a little worse before it gets a little better.
Mm-hmm.
But we just keep going.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, we're almost giving a preview of what Keith is preaching on Sunday.
Yeah.
But I think what we've got, Garret, so that you know where we are, I seem to be at oh gosh, wait, I got into the wrong space. Part 5, reel 3. And we have part 5, reel 3 and part 5, reel 4. And then we have 3 parts of part 6.
Yeah.
So I think we should start because
So do I.
Yeah. And
Okay, so we're going to begin on homelessness and income inequality. They're going to kind of flow together, and I thought we'd start this by having first a discussion on just the general social issue, then the social response, political response, and finally the congregational response and how it affects our congregation, both current and in the past, because we've had both good and bad issues around that in the past. So first one is just what is obvious. It's just increasing. The number of homeless people are increasing dramatically.
And the separation of income inequality
is widening. Is widening and has been widening over a very long period of time. And So in this increase, the numbers are almost impossible to be accurate on. I heard one person say 55,000. Well, I heard 50,000 to 75,000 on a conservative report probably 12 or 13 years ago.
Well, you know, by definition, people without houses are not countable.
Right. And that's even assuming somebody wanted to count them, which is a big assumption. So you mentioned the income inequality, and we will go into some statistics that in a bit, but one that I just wanted to share in a general way is that over the last 30 years, the actual spending income for earned income on a 30-year-old has actually been on a continual decline and is now 50% of what a 30-year-old was earning and what it could purchase 30 years ago.
Right.
So that's really a dramatic change, and that's actually a break in the social contract that most of us assume that the next generation is going to do better.
And it, more even than the social contract, because that sounds so cold and cut and dry,
Yes.
but it's in our heads.
Yes.
You know, it's part of how we perceive the world.
And that's part of what a social contract is. So we need to be really
Right,
clear
okay.
that a social contract is not a legal form. It's
Oh, sure.
it is the emotional agreement that you think you've reached. It's what you think is your right of citizenship to expect.
Your give and take.
Yes. And in this, there's a big issue because one of the things that we frequently hear is, oh, I earned that, or I worked really hard, and I've got the right to that, or I've earned that right.
Move
And-
that over a little bit.
Okay. And the thing is that there's a built-in unemployment rate. So it's 3 to 5%. It's built in. That means you automatically know that you haven't got those people. They're automatically out. And that's not including the people that are working poor.
The poor you will always have with you.
And the when they've actually done surveys of tycoons, of people who have started from scratch, and they ask them, what's the single quality that you would most describe it to? And the number one answer overwhelmingly is always luck. I was lucky to be there at that time. I was lucky where I happened to be. I was lucky because I made this connection. Even when they're rich, C. Douglas Dillon's father said, I was lucky. I walked down on the street corner and there was one of my prep school roommates who was, and came up with this investment that, you know, quadrupled his fortune automatically. It's not hard work. If it were hard work, most of us work hard. You work hard. I work hard. I'm not rich. I'm not even I'm technically not poor, but I'm a hair's breadth above it. So I'm essentially worse off than if I were just a little bit
In a
less.
way, really, really. And because we have this consciousness that everybody gets better and better and better and better and earns more and more and more and more, we have a built-in it's built in to look down on people who are down on their luck.
How interesting that you yeah, it's you know, it's hard work does not equate to success, but yet we want to think that, and we translate that into so much stuff that we do. We're not even conscious of it. I mean,
You know, I'm sorry. I just had the story hit me. Paul Ryan, former Speaker of the House. There's a story about him going to a restaurant, and where it says tip, he wrote, "I have a tip for you. Get a better paying job." And that's so, and it's interesting, isn't it, how that Christian conservative intellectual wing, the people that went running off when the Trumpers came along.
The old Buckley group.
Yeah. So, Ayn Rand,
Yes.
you know, everything is individual. All success is on your own. If you do X, Y, and Z, it doesn't matter, you know.
And the pandemic taught us about essential workers, about people that we need.
Yes.
And they're all the people that Paul Ryan would have said, get a better paying job.
Yeah.
And now they are, and now we're out of them. It's you know, the idea, the almost social Darwinism behind that is insane, because Darwinism is not about this individual or that individual not
is worthy or not worthy.
Right. It's like the collective body can't adapt to the changed environment. That's not the same thing as the individual not having the optimum or equal opportunity. They're totally at odds, and we equate so much stuff. One thing that we do is we equate corporate economic success with social economic success, and they're totally different. You know, what is important to a corporation may actually be damaging to the society as a whole. I mean, we certainly saw that with bankers at the beginning of World War II. And when we get to the end of this section, not even the end, I'm going to be having a whole lot more along those, some that are coming in. And by the way, coming in courtesy of the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. So there's some really big ones sitting out there too, because when people get nervous and panicky, they jump and don't think and don't really contemplate where that slippery slope may slide them. So one of the things that I wanted to think about was two biblical readings. So one is the story of the widow's mite, which is in Mark and Luke. The other one is the Roman centurion and his boy, and that's in Matthew and Luke. The reason why I'm saying that what gospel they're in is because it's also a little moment to take a look at the synoptics and how they work. That, you know, not the same stories are in all three, but they're very commonly in two out of the three. And in both of these instances, that's the case. So in the widow's mite, she goes up and offers a mite, which is the smallest coin available. It's not even, it's half of the smallest Roman coin. And everybody's commenting on, look at how little she's putting in. And Jesus says, but that's part of her, as part of her life, that's much more than somebody who's giving out of their abundance and out of their surplus. And there's a couple things that I love about that story, aside from just the fact that he's appreciating the widow's mite. It's also the fact that that's the first time that I can actually recall or have actually found someone recognizing income inequality and its effects. Because if everybody's supposed to be offering the same, now this was not offering the same obviously, but if everybody's offering the same, or the same percentage. It's going to take more away from the poor because they're taking out of their ability to sustain themselves.
Right.
And of course, socially, if you do that, what you end up with is more people needing to come to get the help, which is that you're offering, that you're collecting for in the first place. So the other part of that, which is something that Nancy had said to me years ago, which is if you take Jesus's, and I'm not sure it's 100% accurate, but if you take Jesus's stories on money, they're essentially saying get your own house in order and keep it in order before you bankrupt yourself, and sort of keep your house in order and then give as you're able to. And I think that's a really important thing that sometimes we forget. It's easy to stand up and forget that what you're asking of somebody, and that he is acknowledging how much this is coming from the widow. I think it's an incredible insight, and I think it's an incredible story about Jesus, and by the way, about the disciples, that they remembered that story. I think it's an incredible story about all of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, the disciples would have remembered it because, once again, it's another one of those stories that indicates that wealth does not indicate superior spirituality.
And the second story, which is the Roman centurion and his boy, proves that in the opposite direction, because the Roman centurion has all sorts of power, all sorts of money, and is doing something that, with having this boy relationship, was something that caused a lot of distress in the Hebrew society in Palestine. So Jesus is saying, yes, that he would go and help him, but not because of his power or his connections or his money, but because of his faith. And that's a powerful story, that you can be rich. That's not going to get you in, but you can be rich and you can still be rewarded.
Right. Be rich and reach out for help.
Yes. And that there's something beyond your wealth that you have to offer to the world, and something beyond the widow's poverty that she has to offer to the world. And
commitment.
Yes. And I think that's really a big thing that we forget about when we're discussing homelessness, when we're discussing tithing. Sometimes we remember and put it in, but it's easy to lose track of the big picture, looking at the small picture.
Okay, that was one part conversation about homelessness and income inequality. There were a couple of little, and we've got a lot of stuff to do, so I'm not going to go on a lot, but there were a couple things that I noticed, Garret, when we were talking about essential workers and the pay rate. The value that we put on work. Here are some of the lowest paid people, and yet in a pinch we find out that they have some of the most valuable work.
And even that we even do that. I mean, I've been thinking, this has been a year or two, I've been thinking back, and it's like every time somebody is made the butt of a joke because of in a sitcom or something, it's like, wait a minute, that person's job is actually important. Whether it's Ralph Cramden or what was Art Carney's character that worked in the sewer?
You're right.
Ed Norton. Or Ed Bundy on married with children. I mean, all those jobs exist because we need them to exist, you know? And
the people that we really cannot do without.
right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if we actually carried that through consistently, realizing that, you know what, if we're at a Starbucks and we're buying something, we're buying it because we need that person to make that for us. Otherwise, we have to go home and make it ourselves. And we're not going to do it probably as well.
Certainly not as expensively.
No. Well, I don't go to Starbucks. But any of them. I mean, if the job is existing, there's a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that struck me, well, that occurred to me that we didn't mention, the stock market. And the difference between how the stock market evaluates the economy and the way people live the economy.
Oh, totally different.
You know, in one sense, you can look at the stock market and it tells you some things about the economy, but the stock market going over 10,000 does not make milk go under $2.
Right.
You know, it doesn't work that way. Your lived experience, unless you're a big stock trader and you know, your money really, you are earning your income off of that to a large extent. The stock market does not really reflect your life,
right,
life of everyday people.
And we've been sold that a lot over, especially the last 40 to 50 years, that was not thought of in the same way before. People paid attention to the stock market, and yes, it reflected, but it got really out of control. And as it started escalating, people kept wondering why it's so big, and their lives weren't getting any better. Well, that's because the stock market is about, at this point, gigantic corporations and not little individual stockholders. If you're going to be you're still going to have to be a Rockefeller or somebody else.
Unless the whole bottom falls out, like the crash, in which case it really does topple the entire economy. When Lehman Brothers and all of them, the reason we had to bail them out was because that was going to put a hole in the economy that couldn't just be filled up. Right. And it was going to be filled. But it takes something mighty damn dramatic to make those things link up anymore.
Well, and even at that, I mean, within a year, a trader at Chase in London blew something like $20 billion on a ridiculous thing that he wasn't supposed to, and the bank had to cough up the money, which is really mind-boggling that they had the money to cough up. You know, it's like, do you think that we don't know what's going on? I mean,
you know, we're in big trouble. Well, okay, so that's reel 3. I'm going to reel 4. Open. Yeah, okay, I've got it set now. I come back to Zoom and I share my screen. Reel 4. There we are. Okay. Here we go.
So, wanted to finish up with some statistics for people to contemplate. We'll be coming back to discuss them. But first ones are from the 2020 U.S. Census, and they do a 5-year average.
Okay.
So the average in Los Angeles, the average Los Angeles County income is $65,000, and the individual per capita income is $37,000. In the city,
65 is for household.
And in the city, it's 71,000. Now that's an average, and 71,000 average, and 35,000 per capita. And then there were some estimates that were done for 2021, which is that the individual is 78,000, and an individual and a household, not individual. I'm sorry, household. And the number of working people is 2.05, and the total number of people is 2.77
million.
No, 2.77 people per household.
People per household.
People per household. And the rent percentages for an individual, it's 45% of their income. And once again, the individual income is in the high 30s. Okay, so the individual income, it's approximately 45%, and the household is 24%. Part of that is because people have owned homes much longer, and most mortgages are held by households.
Okay.
Once you reduce that down by an average of 33%, assuming that people are paying that much
For their taxes.
with taxes, what you're left over with is $3,300 for the household, which includes automobiles, insurance, transportation, food, and utilities, as well as anything that you might want to do on the side. And an individual is left with about $1,160. Just to give you
$1,160.
Yes. Now, a lot of the households are going to have to pay for childcare. So just to give you an idea, Pinwheel, which rents out space at the church, that's $1,440 per child per month. So that's over $15,000, $17,000 per year. If you go part-time, it's only $1,140 per child. So what I'm saying is that when you start backing,
Wait for it to close.
Yeah. So I'm saying is that when you're finished, you're really not looking at much money, and I think that's something that it's important for the church to actually contemplate, because I'm not sure that we even know what our congregation looks like on a scale economically. I mean, you'd need to ask in some anonymous way. It would have to be, and you'd have to ask whether it's a household and what percentage of their money goes to rent.
Right.
But it would have to be anonymous. None of us are going to want to be called out.
Certainly not. Certainly not. But it would be, it would be interesting to know. And also because, and we kind of grazed this issue before, I'm sure we'll move on to it more, but we make assumptions that the congregation is all financially stable.
Right.
And homeless people without houses they're other people.
Right.
They're not congregation people.
And I think it's interesting because I want to recall a couple of things, but one is that, as we said earlier, and if we want, we can go back and print them again, but in the Articles of Confederation in 1781, they outlawed poor people, paupers, vagabonds. They were stripped of all rights of citizenship. 6 years later, in the preamble, the general welfare of the people has replaced that as a concept. Sometimes growth comes in spurts, and sometimes it comes and goes back and forth.
Right.
And I say that because as a church, we've had this experience too. So when Neil first came, I wasn't planning on this here, but we'll do this here. When Neil first came, I had small groups. Well, we didn't have somebody doing congregational care.
Right.
But there were deacons. So Neil said, well, why don't you do me a favor and just, since you know them, just go and sort of sit in as an observer / participant, and just because they're handling the pastoral care. And one of the discussions that came up was about a food pantry that they had. And someone was going over how they had checked it, how all the details. And Pamela Fairbanks said, why are we doing this? Why aren't we giving it away? Why are we worrying about our inventory? And the thing was, the church had been in a hunkered down atmosphere. It made sense when they're stuck in that mood, in that mold, and they had a board of directors that was antagonistic to ministry, breathing down their neck, as it was. So the only two entities that were really surviving were the deacons, well, three entities: deacons, Wednesday night Bible study, and the Latin ministry, and everything else was gone. So the upshot of that was, that's exactly what we did. Bought a cart, put the food out, and just let them come and get it. Well, pretty soon there was a little group. And Crystal Bowles, if you remember Crystal, was doing hospitality. And so she would talk to them. Well, they could hear what was going on in the sanctuary, but they didn't really want to be in the church. They really didn't feel welcome. And then at one point there was some construction going on in that lobby, so the hospitality moved upstairs, but there was a television set, so they were listening. And she would ask them, well, what do you think about what he's saying there? What do you think about this? And they were talking within, and mind you, this was an enormous issue, just having them in the church. Neil was more than ambivalent. The board of directors was downright antagonistic. And finally, at some point, Pat had come to the church, and she was talking about Not in My Backyard, which was a program where people were trying to get used to the idea of the poor people being part of our community. And I'm sure Neil felt like he was getting bombarded from all directions when he wasn't expecting to. But, and I have to give him credit, he actually stood up at one point and said to the congregation, I have to admit something. There is more ministry going on upstairs than there is in the sanctuary. And it was absolutely true. And, you know, the only thing that people like myself, Pam Fairbanks, Pat Beaver, the only thing we did was stock that cart. Pat, Pam, myself, all we did is stock that cart. The rest of it was Crystal and those people and those guys, mostly guys. There were a couple of women there, but the boards of director were quite upset. Who's going to want to come into the church? Well, what is the purpose of the church? Which of course wasn't a really good one. It was mostly it was one person who was sort of given the task of trying to talk to me on this. And this would go on, and then he'd come up another time. That guy has a car. He's taken 2 vegetables. Well, how many vegetables do you think are going to last in a week? How many times in a week do you have vegetables? Well, he's driving a car. I said, fine.
Maybe he's living in the car.
I said, fine. His car is parked around the corner on Huntley. Do me a favor and walk around the corner. I said, fine. I will be your usher for a moment. Go look at the car. And he came back very sheepishly and he said, what's all that stuff? I said, he lives in the car. Exactly what you said. From that point on,
girl, you can hurt yourself.
From that point on, that board member apologized to me, apologized to Pat. You know, he that was the moment at which he got it, but he had to understand that moment. I'm also not sure that people understand how dangerous it is downtown when it's homeless downtown, because we don't have enough time on this one right now, but someone said to someone, well, go downtown, who was a transgendered person. She'd be dead. It's very dangerous. When I did Brown Bag, and I've told you this before, when I was doing Brown Bag, there were several of us one time, more than normal. So we split up into pairs, which we always did, and distributed out the bag lunches. And one woman who normally went with me said, I'm going to stay with the cars and watch them.
Right.
And she's right out on the main street, literally across from a park. And it's the middle of the afternoon. When we got back, she was locked in the car shaking, and she had some guy had attempted to rape her on the back of the car, and the crowd had pulled her off before we even knew what had happened. It's a very dangerous place downtown, and I don't think we appreciate how dangerous that is. So I think this is a good time for us.
Okay.
Scary stories about ministry. Scary about the woman when you went down with the brown bag lunches, but scarier about what you called being antagonistic to ministry.
Oh yeah.
That's just that. What a strange thing that is. Antagonistic to ministry.
But we've had this before where people get the idea that the church is just supposed to be a Sunday service and everything is supposed to be geared around that and that alone, and it's not supposed to, which is exactly what got Troy Perry fired once.
Yeah. True that. Do you think that attitude has changed?
It seems to come and go. I don't think the board is really antagonistic that I'm aware of. And I don't know that I would say that I've had a board that was really antagonistic. I mean, when there were the issues after Neil left, I don't know that it was the same sort of thing. I think it was a different, I think there was an issue there, but I think it was a different issue.
So, did I get that right? Part 601, share sound.
Okay, so we were talking about homelessness and the social issues, And then we wanted to continue talking about the social responses and the political responses that have come up. So the first one, which we touched on, is not in my backyard.
Yes.
Nobody wants to have the homeless in their backyard, but
And yeah, sometimes it's not in my church.
yes, which we also touched on,
Yeah,
and we're
last
going to touch
time.
on again.
Uh-huh.
It's sort of out of sight, out of mind. And the other thing that I've been sensing is that as I've noticed the increase in the numbers, particularly the number of tents and tent villages that have been cropping up, is the psychological distance that people are putting between them and homeless people as people.
There's that. What is that movie about the? Oh gosh, it's one of those dumb teenager movies. Like, the dumb teenager who gets smart, and she meets a homeless person. You must be the homeless that I've always heard of.
Yes.
You're the homeless.
The person, the representative. Yes. And with that, there's come a whole host of easy answers or easy ways to point a finger, which is, oh, it's mental illness. Which we've discussed. One of the issues is before you even know whether it's a mental illness, you have to make sure that somebody's actually hydrated and fed
and right,
and their
right,
electrolytes are in balance, because a potassium imbalance can imitate psychosis. And there are lots of other ones that do that, and also the anxiety that comes from that.
And I was just going to say, the stress of living on the street will drive you crazy.
And the danger of it. I
Yes.
mean, we've talked about it, but it is so intensely dangerous. We have a member who found a park to live in. Then she had to move from a park to a house near the park because that was more protected. And these are things we don't think about, and we don't want to think about. We want to point the finger and say there's something wrong with that person.
Yes.
And
that goes back to the things we were talking about from the colonial and post-colonial era. With the whole, individual responsibility. It's all on you.
Well,
it has nothing to do with any system or any...
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I worked for a company, and I was aghast. It was a morning meeting, and security was doing this question and answer period. And I was so astounded because when they asked some question and it had to do with earthquake safety or something, and even the person said, because finally when nobody answered, I finally answered, and it was like, what are things that you can do? What are things that you can that you can fix? And it turned out that they had wanted to have everybody start feeling like they were responsible for earthquake damage, which is an act of God, or flood damage. And it's like, no, we don't build the building. We don't even put up the shelving in the building. We occupy the building for mercantile purposes. We do not have that sort of control. Even if you put the entire staff in the entire building together from top to bottom and had the operations manager in there, they still couldn't control everything. And I find that I was just so disturbed. I couldn't even say something, and in a crowd, how do you say, and I couldn't even articulate it until later. It was so, it had caught me so far off guard. But yet that's what we try and do, find some way to assign somebody the blame for something instead of saying, well, you know what, maybe we need to take a look at some of this in a bigger context. And you know, that does tie into one of the things you had mentioned, which was that period where the Articles of Confederation actually made it unconstitutional to be poor, and the writing of the Constitution in the preamble, where the general welfare of the people is one of the purposes for a government to be at all.
There's that pilgrim ethic too, that they're kind of coming out of.
Right, and the pilgrim ethic, although we think of the pilgrim ethic as everywhere, actually the pilgrim ethic was more in the North, particularly at that point. You didn't have
and so were the writers of the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution.
Well, they had Southerners too.
But it was by the time you got to that point, the articulation was really heavily dominated by the New England,
but also the Virginians, because you got to keep in mind, you not only had Jefferson with the Declaration, but you had Madison with the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, and the difference in their temperaments were also a whole thing, because Jefferson was far more flexible, I guess. I wouldn't say he was. He still owned slaves, but at least he was willing to give some thought to it. Madison just sort of, I don't want to think about this, sort of like homelessness. So, kind of getting back to the homeless thing, some of the quick political answers that have come up, you know, we're going to build all sorts of new missions. Well, and you're going to hire who to make them safe that you don't have now, and you have to have all of the staff that you don't have. You have to have staff to cook food that you don't have, much less having trained social workers and therapists, which is going to be really difficult when you've got a 3-month waiting list to see a therapist or a social worker. So you've got to address a whole lot of infrastructure issues along the way.
And that's still, it's not trying to go to the root of the problem and fix the problem. It's trying to deal with the consequences.
And it's trying to, the symptomology that we're looking at.
Right.
And the funny thing is, the biggest proponent of this build and hire thing is the person that most of all should see the pitfall of trying to take private property and use it for a government service. I mean, if they took the grove from him, he'd be up in arms. You know, because there is, and it's a reality that we have to face. Somebody's going to scream socialism, and somebody's going to say that we're undermining the work ethic. And
if you give away freebies, people will just be lazy and stay home.
And this goes back to the thing that I said before, and which was about we without even thinking, we say, I worked really hard for this. You know, I worked really hard for my, you know, new car, my new trip, my, you know, my coat, my fur coat or something. We'll go really tacky there. But the truth is that, as we've said before, lots of people work hard. Working hard isn't the answer. It's the justification that we use, and the fact that we keep coming back to a justification, because most of the time when you hear that, it's not because somebody has said anything to them. Nobody said, you stole that car or something. You know, it's almost like a preemptive strike. Somebody's going to accuse me of something, or I can almost hear it in my, you know, and so it's this constant defending. And one of the challenges that I put myself to is to just stop saying that, which is really hard. You know, it's something that, you know, like if we tried to have the church say it, I have to say it would probably be like inclusive language was years ago. It's like, it would set people off.
I wrote it was lyrics to Away in the Manger, I think, called The Indigent Sister. And I showed it to someone at another MCC. The last verse was, "The love of the Christ child is not so abstract to let me walk by you without turning back. Stay with me, dear sister, and try to forgive till the calling of Christmas is one I can live." And the person said to me, "If you sang that at my church, there would be a riot." And I was like, wow. I mean, I thought people would be disturbed maybe or uncomfortable maybe, but he said they would walk, they would go out, it would be a nightmare.
So nightmares are made of this. Trying to reconcile, our better angels with our comfort zone.
That's a good way of putting it.
Because we all want to feel like we're, giving and open and ready to share and, serve the homeless people and feed the hungry and da 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 da. But again, that NIMBY thing comes back again. Not in my neighborhood, not in my church, not in my sight.
Not too close to me.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard.
Yes.
Okay. It's Reverend Dr. Karma Amos and Doug Berger, Sarah Jane Ramage, and Marsha Warren from MCC. Stewardship in this context is described as an annual ask for a financial commitment to the church. This request may be a formal written pledge or a verbal agreement. It is essential to note that it is not the traditional time, talent, treasure approach. The power of asking for a written commitment should never be underestimated. So that sounds like it's going to be a very interesting approach to our stewardship and our generosity and our, what do you think about that giving tree that we've been mentioning some of the people who have made a legacy of generosity in our history?
Yeah, I kind of like it. There was a couple times where kind of like most of them have been people that are now deceased. And I like the fact that, Paul was included. So it wasn't just a matter of the financial legacy. So I kind of like the fact that it seems to have a nice broad swath of people.
And so yeah, we're going to have a few more, and they've all been deceased, I believe.
No, because we had Steve Harper. Steve Harper. Yeah, he was up there.
No.
What was he there for then?
I don't know, but he might have been speaking about somebody, but he's not one of the people that we honored on generosity.
Okay, that may have been, that may have been the day that I came in late and I was in the middle of it, I think.
Okay, no.
So I was a little confused that day. That's why I was.
Yeah, no, it's been all those who have gone before.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting list of folks. It is. I'm looking forward to Sunday. I'm going to be able to speak about somebody from the early years. And on that note, Would you like to pray us out, Garret?
Okay. God, we
Oh.
just
I'm sorry, I was
thank
just going to say John Suarez just tuned in. Hi, John. We're about to pray.
God, we just thank you for the blessing of this time, the blessing of sharing, the blessing of new ideas and old ideas, and sharing our thoughts on the world in which we live and how we live that out as Christians. So we just thank you for opening us up and letting us in to a bigger world, and all the names that are holy, all the names that are sacred, in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen. Amen. And Shelley and John both joined us late, but you can catch up and see what we were talking about earlier. And we'll catch up again with everybody next week. Thank you for being there. Thank you for praying with us, sharing with us, thinking with us, and continue to post your comments on Facebook, on the Facebook page. Here, well, you can figure it out. You know how to do that stuff. So with that, I bid you all a lovely, lovely good night. Good night, Garret, and good night to everyone out there.
Good night.